Hey everyone, so for today's card I'm using a lot of the same supplies I used in my previous video because they were all sitting out on my desk, and then of course the ideas started to roll and I wanted to create some more. So I'm using the Simple Stories Smarty Pants pattern paper again, and my Blueprints 1 and 2 dies for a lot of the layers. And then I grabbed this MFT Red Delicious Dynamics. I thought of doing a big apple because I'm going with the teacher theme still. So I die cut the apple from some pattern paper as well. And you can see here I've already got it all laid out. And with something like this, I just find a lot of times the pattern papers kind of just blend into each other. You don't notice them as much. There's not a lot of depth going on. So one thing I like to do when I'm doing something like this and layering a lot of pattern papers is to sponge the edges of the cardstock with coordinating colors, or else just, kind of a brown ink to give it a more of a distressed look, and it just kind of gives a bit of depth and finishes off the edges. So for this card, I decided to use my little mini distress inks. And you can see here, that's how I store the little mini blending tool foams. I'm going to keep one for each ink, and then they fit right in the bottom of the little distress mini ink cubes here you don't need any Velcro or anything. They just fit perfectly, and the bottom of the ink pads are deep enough that they hold it without the foam touching like the surface of wherever you store your ink pads. So it's perfect. So really like that. I always have to remember though to look when I pick out my little mini ink cubes, like lift it up and make sure I actually have an ink pad there in there. So anywho, all I'm doing is just using the little mini blending tools and blending the ink onto it. I'm doing it over scrap paper. If you don't want to waste ink, you're not really wasting very much, but if that bothers you, you can do it over the craft sheet. I find when I do it over the craft sheet, any of the ink that's on the craft sheet, I'm always like picking it up with my fingers, smearing it onto any white cardstock I'm working on. I just make a mess. So I prefer the scrap paper because then that way, the ink absorbs and I'm not getting it everywhere. No matter what, when you do techniques like this, you're going to ink on your fingers, which is fine. I just don't like smearing it on the finished product at the end, which is usually what I do. So I used Barn Door Distress Ink for the apple, and then a tiny bit of Vintage Photo just on that very edge. And then I used the Vintage Photo on the rest of the layers except for the little leaves and the green strip. That's where I used Forest Moss. And you can just see how much more depth you give the pattern papers when you do that. So laid everything out again, was really happy with it. So now I'm going to go into my sentiment, which is my always like go-to, this is how I do add sentiments to cards, makes it so much easier. I just grabbed a strip of lightweight vellum. And then I'm going to use the largest teacher stamp from my new All About Teacher stamp set. And I used the anti-static powder tool on the vellum first, just to keep any stray embossing powder from sticking to the vellum, because it really, especially like when you handle it with your fingers, you can really pick up a lot of the embossing powder. So I always use an anti-static tool on my vellum. And then I inked up the stamp with MFT Sweet Tooth pigment ink. And then use my stamp positioner so I can get it stamped straight on here. And then inking it up a second time. You always want to make sure when you're inking with pigment inks like this, sorry, my brain just like stopped. When you're working with pigment inks, you don't want to press too deeply into the stamp pad because it'll just kind of ooze up everywhere and then you lose the detail of the stamp, especially with one like this where there's actually a lot of detail to the letters. So stamp that, and of course pour it over my detail white embossing powder. Again, detail is kind of key with anything with fine little lines and that. And then heat that up with my heat tool until it's completely melted, which only takes like a minute. Embossing powders melt really, really quickly on vellum, so it doesn't take long at all. Melted that, and then I just wipe off any stray anti-static powder with my fingers. And then that was it for the sentiment. So now I'm just going to adhere all these layers together that I have cut and die cut and sponged. So just grabbing my little Scotch, not little, I guess it's big. To me, it doesn't bother me in the size of it. Some people told me they cannot handle the size of it. It's way too big for them. I don't know. I don't even think about it. I love my ATG. I've had that thing for years now. I think I have entire videos dedicated to the ATG. So anywho, I'm going to adhere all the layers the way I had them all planned out here. So getting everything layered down, and then for the little small pieces, I just used a bit of my Tombow Monomulti adhesive to adhere the little stem and the leaves. And then I'm going to position the sentiment how I want it. So I just kind of want it off to the side just a little bit, and then just wrap it around the card front, flip it over, and then I'm just using my standard Scotch tape to adhere the vellum down. Doesn't matter if it doesn't look nice. You're not going to see all this anyway when the card is done. And then I have a little #1 stamp in that set, so I'm going to ink that up with the vintage photo ink. And then I'm just stamping onto this scrap of, this is MFT's Safety Orange cardstock. So stamp it onto there, and then I'm going to just punch it out with one of my 1-inch circle punches. If you have circle dies, that's great. I've never given up my circle punches just because they're quick and easy, and they're just sitting right there. So anywho, I'm going to adhere that into place as well with just a little bit more ATG adhesive. And then for my card base, it's going to be another piece of Safety Orange cardstock. And about a year ago, I was making all these cards. Like when it gets into fall and stuff, I love these shades of orange and yellow. And this scrap, you can see this lighter color. This is Stampin' Up's old, more mustard cardstock, which they don't make anymore, which is just a gorgeous color. So this has been my replacement. Is my favorite thing is Safety Orange. You could see there it was a little bit deeper of a color, and I actually think it's prettier than MFT's or Stampin' Up's more mustard. It's a deeper color. It's so pretty, and I love it. So I have found a replacement, and I highly recommend it. So I thought I would just include that little bit here in the video for you guys. So once I was done adhering everything to the card front, I'm grabbing another sentiment from my All About Teacher set and inking it up with the vintage photo ink again, and the stamp positioner. And then I die cut another little piece of craft cardstock here and just adding a tiny bit of adhesive just to keep it in place on my craft mat, so I can use the stamp positioner again and get the sentiment stamped straight on it. And this is the piece that you would write something to recipients. So I chose the smaller little verse in the set that won't take up this whole piece. So ink up the stamp again with the vintage photo. I'm going to stamp that into place, and then I'm going to finish off the inside of my card, which I just used a couple pieces of leftover pattern paper that I'd used on the front. This time I didn't bother sponging and doing all that on the inside. I like my insides to be finished, but I don't like to spend the same amount of time on the inside as I do on the outside, because then my cards are going to take way too long. As it is, I probably spend too much time making my cards. But yeah, I just adhered those together, and then I'm going to adhere the little sentiment piece, get that in place, and then I'm going to adhere that to the inside of the card, and that's all there was to it. So as always, I feel like I'm repeating myself all the time, but I guess after a while it is get kind of repetitive. But if you're new to my videos, this will be the first time you hear it. As always, there will be a link below the video to my blog post with the pictures and links to all the supplies used. Always check out the description box below the videos, because that's where all the info and the links and all the good stuff is. So check that out, and as always, thank you guys for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos. I definitely appreciate it, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!